Hey everybody, welcome to Q Plus EDU 2021. We are super thrilled that you're here with us today. Today's session is an intergenerational chat between bisexual men. My name is Frederick. My pronouns are they, them. I am Out Youth's Texas Gender and Sexuality Alliance Network Coordinator, and I will be moderating our panel discussion today. For folks who may be blind or vision impaired or joining us on the phone, I am a white person with blonde hair pulled back in a clip. I'm wearing dangly earrings that are the color of the bi flag, so pink on top, purple in the middle, and blue on the bottom. I'm also wearing a black t-shirt that in the colors of the bi flag says assume nothing. I figured it was appropriate for today. So I am going to drop our first question, our introductions for our panelists in the chat because it's a very long question, but I will also read it aloud. Please introduce yourself, tell us your name, your age, I'm 36, your pronouns, where you're from, how you identify within the LGBTQIA+ community, and give a physical description of yourself for blind or vision impaired attendees. Also wanted to acknowledge that I am coming to you from Jumanos, Tonkawa, Coahuiltecan, and oh my gosh, I totally spaced on the fourth one. Comanche territory, also known as Austin, Texas. So let's start in reverse alphabetical order. And Willie, would you introduce yourself, please?
Sure. Thanks for having me here, Frederick. It's great to be here. My name is Willie Ferralis. I am calling in from Ramaita Shaloni land, which is colonized to San Francisco, California. I use he pronouns, they pronouns, or anything that feels true, authentic, and offered with love. I have brown skin, long black hair pulled back in a clip, right at the side. So a little facial hair stubble, wearing a black shirt that says my ancestors are proud. And I identify as queer and feel at home with the narratives of the bisexual community, cis male-ish, little bendy. And did I miss anything?
I think age was the only other thing.
Age, yeah. I'm 34. I'll be 35 in just a couple weeks here.
Awesome. Well, happy early birthday.
Thank you.
Let's see if I can do the alphabet backwards. Mark, I think you're next.
I think so. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining. So my pronouns are he, him. I'm 38 years old. I consider myself bisexual. I'm from Ontario, Canada. I grew up in rural, conservative, southwestern Ontario and now live in Ottawa, the capital of Canada. It's about 45 minutes from New York State. The closest major city would be Syracuse, about 3 hours away in the US. I'm white-skinned, brown hair and eyes, big brows, thin facial hair as well, wearing a yellow collared shirt. I've been told that I look like someone from Malcolm in the Middle or like the son of the Hulk. I don't know either of them, but I would take it as compliments. About 5'9", 170 pounds. That's me.
Awesome. I know exactly who you're talking about, and I don't know the actor's name.
It's okay.
Thank you. Jax.
Hi everyone, I'm Jax. I use he, they pronouns. I am 14 years old and I come from the Pacific Northwest. I'm a bisexual trans guy and I am I'm young, I'm white, I have short black hair and blue eyes, very minimal facial hair, it's coming, and a black shirt and a silver necklace. Did I miss anything?
I think you got it all. Good job.
Fantastic.
And Alex.
Hiya, I'm Alex. My pronouns are they, he. I'm 29. I'm currently Zooming in from England, but by nationality, I'm half American, half Scottish. So I spent my childhood between New Jersey and Edinburgh in Scotland. I identify as transmasculine, non-binary. And also as queer, sometimes pansexual, but as I'm sure you'll hear as we talk, it kind of depends who I'm with, how I identify myself. I have white skin, short dark hair, short dark beard, and I'm wearing glasses, black t-shirt, and black headphones. And yeah, I think I've not missed anything.
Fantastic. Thank you all so much. So Alex, that was a perfect segue. Thank you. So as folks in our audience may or may not know, bisexual is an umbrella term. So that can encompass all kinds of labels, including things like pansexual, omnisexual, polysexual, fluid, heteroflexible, homoflexible, which are terms that I only learned in the past couple of years, queer, as many of us have said, and lots of other things. So Alex, you shared that, pansexual sometimes feels like the right label for you and sometimes not. Can you speak a little bit to that, and what are the circumstances under which that does feel like the right label, and when do other labels feel better for you?
Yep. So for me, I use pansexual because it feels authentic to the fact that I can be attracted both romantically and sexually to people of all genders. I know that some people use bi to mean the same thing, but for me, pan feels right in that context. And I guess when I was starting to come out, that was a new word that people were starting to use for that. Having said that, sometimes when I'm talking with people who I feel don't understand that label, then I might use the word bi. And I sometimes use queer when I just want to be a bit looser about things, because I feel like sometimes things are really overdefined. And for me, queer is a state of being that goes beyond who I'm attracted to, and that can describe more, because I think sometimes the focus is just on who do you want to have sex with. And as someone who's partially asexual as well, I find that doesn't always ring true.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Jack, same question. What labels work for you, and are there different labels that work under different circumstances?
In most spaces, I identify myself as bisexual. It's the easiest to use. It sits right with me, and it feels comfortable. But in spaces where I know I won't have to explain, I do feel the most comfortable with the term omnisexual. It feels the most correct, just language-wise, and it just sits right with me. Queer is also really helpful for me because, as Alex mentioned, it is kind of a state of being, and it's something that I very much so align with. So any three of those terms.
Yeah, you can't make bisexuals choose. It's just not fair. Mark, how about you? You said earlier that bisexual is pretty firmly the label you use. Is that true all the time?
Yes, I admit to, I come from a bit of a position of ignorance in some capacity. I'm not too familiar with all the various terminology as well. I did a cursory review. I still feel bisexual is the best term. It may seem limiting, but it's what I'm comfortable with. I mean, I'm physically, sexually attracted to both men and women. Heteroflexible, I wasn't familiar with that term either. And I was like, maybe, I mean, not that I prefer women, but my history is being with women, both as romantic partners and as friends. But I don't think it's accurate for me. So bisexual it is. As someone else mentioned, it's easily understood as well.
Definitely, despite all of the bi-erasure. Willie, how about you? Can you tell us a little bit more about your labels?
Yeah. So, I identify as queer, and I usually say identify as queer and resonate or feel at home with the narratives of the bisexual community. For me, I feel like the definition of bisexual has changed over my lifetime. At least how I understood it, how it was handed to me, was very much about men and women, was very much about, gender binary. And to understand, like, a lot of folks are using it much more expansively, which I can appreciate. And it doesn't land for me in that way. So, like, I respect and honor that people use it in that way, and it doesn't feel best for me. So, but that said, like, my history, with partners has been, with people who identify as men and as women, and so I still feel like, in my own personal definition, or what's deeply imprinted, what I'm not hasn't been unrooted in me yet, fits those older definitions. And I also really like queer as, there's a number of scholars that use that term as inherently in opposition to the state, and appreciate the scholarship done by both Settler and Indigenous scholars that talk about settler colonialism and its impact on how we've been funneled down in Western society into gender binary and into heterosexism, and more and more homosexuality is being accepted as it fits in the box within the boxes of replicates heterosexuality and power dynamics. So I really like that term a lot.
Yeah, thank you so much. I definitely went through the process of, at 18 years old, identifying as bisexual, and then being told that bisexuality was transphobic. And so being like, oh, well, I love everybody, so pansexual. And I have come back into the place of reclaiming bisexuality as a political identity. And so if I'm in good company, I tell people I identify as bisexual, queer, and pansexual in that order. And most people in the community understand what I mean, which I am grateful for. So getting to that piece of it, tell us your coming out story, if you will. When did you first come out? What year was it? How old were you? And what has coming out been like for you since the first time you came out? Because we know everybody in the queer community, but especially bisexual folks, I feel like, have to come out over and over and over again. So tell us about the first time. I'm going to jump into the middle of the alphabet. Mark, tell us about your first coming out experience.
So it's tough to answer that directly. It's been about 20 years that I realized I was bisexual. There was no big declaration or anything. I've been in 2 marriages in my life, including my current one. Both were to women. So it was never openly obvious to the outsider that I was attracted to men as well. I came out very subtly, like first to friends at work. I was quite close to a male colleague who is gay, and eventually I became aware that there were rumors swirling around about me. I started so I was like, okay, well, it doesn't really bother me, but may as well be more open about things. I started making comments, like joining conversations with women who were talking about how attractive this or that person was. It's a little superficial, I know. Put a rainbow flag up in my office. I kind of took a similar approach to making friends aware that I went both ways. I'm not out to my family, apart from a couple very progressive members. Most of my family and extended family are evangelical Christians, so to know this about me would hurt them. It might make my parents feel like they failed as parents. It's the sad reality of how they would probably react. I mean, they wouldn't disown me, but they would, what did we do? Where did we go wrong? Type of thing. I mean, I get along fine with my parents. So I'm like, what is accomplished by telling them something that I know will hurt them? I'm not too close with my family, not alienated, just distant. My closest relatives are on the West Coast and I'm in Ontario. So yeah, it's kind of been a progression. Mm-hmm.
Thank you for sharing that with us. Yeah, I think that raises a great point that, we know that statistically, folks who fall under that bisexual umbrella are less likely to be out to important people in their lives than lesbian or gay folks, or people with other, or straight folks. I guess straight folks don't have to come out anymore. But Alex, how about you?
Yeah, so I first came out when I was in school. I was about 12 or 13, and it wasn't really a revelation to me. I'd always just authentically felt romantically attracted to people of both genders. At the time, I definitely only understood there to be 2 genders, so that was where I was. Having said that, school, I think the level of bi-erasure, and I mean, this was about 15 years ago, it was so bad that they just assumed that I was saying that I was gay. And that was it. So I kind of said that I was bi, and everyone heard that I was gay. After I transitioned, I started having relationships with people of all genders, and I think that sort of was a coming out without saying anything. I still don't know if my parents really know that I'm bi. I'm married to a woman, and I suspect they'd be surprised if they found out that I had a relationship with a guy now. But my wife is also bi, and it's really helpful for me that kind of in my chosen family, it's just there's not really a need to come out. There's an assumption, we're all queer, and that's fab.
I love that. Thank you so much. Willie, how about you?
Yeah, good question. Yeah. I mean, I feel like for a long time, there wasn't a lot of I didn't do a lot of disclosure, because I felt, well, a couple of reasons. One, I felt I was like pretty careful about who I told, like one, because of just homophobia and hidden biphobia in that, like buried several layers under that. But also because the sort of just throughout my life, I feel like there's just been a real resistance, real difficulty for many people to kind of um, hold space that that's even a possibility. That I think for men, maybe in particular, that bisexual is just a phase toward being gay. And like I felt like I had to be, yeah, it just felt it worked best for me. It felt like it worked best for me to kind of not disclose a lot. And also I was dealing with a lot of my own like internalized heterosexism and homophobia. Like I was so afraid of that possibly being true that I couldn't like clearly assess what was actually true for me. Like even after being in a really committed relationship with a woman for like 7 years and having money together and like planning a family, we were in an open relationship and we had another partner, a guy, the last 3 years, like that. Even with all of that, there was still like the fear and internalized phobias inside of me, like had me questioning myself, like, well, what's true? Is that really true? Am I just, because like I would get feedback from people, from friends of mine as well, of like, oh, well, what do you really want? This kind of like be honest with yourself sort of thing, which really wasn't helpful at all. So, so like I would be like I was honest with my with that partner like really early on. In like I was a go-go dancer in college, after college for a few years. So in that scene, I was pretty honest, um, and like told my family, and kind of a need to know bit, like when things were really difficult and that relationship was breaking up, told them about that stuff. And I'm a lot more open now. Like now it's like, I feel like it's just so important to have visibility and representation and understanding, and for that not to, to kind of be able to play a part in peeling back the shame. So I'm very clear about it, and very clear about the pressures that made it a really difficult journey for me. So that's not just the first time, I guess, that I came out, but a little snapshot of, kind of the arc of how I got to where I am today.
Thank you so much for sharing that with us, Willie. Jax, how about you?
So my finding out story is much more interesting than my coming out story. My mom herself is bisexual, so she and my coming out helped her to come out. So she's always been taking me to pride parades as a kid, and swearing that she's straight, and just like she's always been more than accepting with me. So I wasn't particularly afraid to come out to my family. But my finding out story is very interesting. I was at sixth grade camp. I was 12, I believe, in 2018. And I was crushing on my best friend, who happened to be also my bunkmate. So we were spending like the whole week together, and I realized probably the second day of camp that I had a crush on them, but I knew that at the time, like it was very obvious to me that I'm bisexual, because I was also crushing on two guys at the same time. So it was just not a question for me. And the realizing I was bi part was not difficult, though it was the communicating about it. And I didn't have anyone to talk to. There aren't really organized spaces for kids in the sixth grade, at least not, in schools. And the only person I knew that was around my age that was queer was my cousin. And at the time, my cousin and I lived very far apart, and there was no technology at this camp. So we had no way of communicating, and I had no way of talking to people about knowing that I was bi. So I ended up, telling my best friend, like, hey, I'm not going to tell you who it is because, that can make things real awkward for everyone here, considering, everyone was sharing like bunks together and everything. It's just like, whoever it could possibly be, it will be awkward. So, I needed to tell someone. So I told my best friend that I liked a girl at the camp. And then after about a week, once we got back to school and we're like living in our own homes and not at overnight camp, I told her that I had a crush on her. I knew that, she was straight, and she is to this day. And she actually prides herself in being how I found out. So we yeah, it was definitely difficult to find out for me a little bit, but it was I thankfully am very, very fortunate to have an accepting family. And even, at the time I was living in San Diego, so my school environment and just environments as a whole were fairly accepting as well.
That's awesome. I'm so glad to hear that. And we are working on getting GSAs in the middle schools, but it's definitely a slow process. So a couple of y'all have mentioned, the bi-erasure and biphobia. And Willie, you talk specifically about how those things are different for men in the community. And I know this wasn't a pre-planned question, so no need to jump in if you don't feel so called, but how do you feel like biphobia and bi-erasure impact you as a man, and how do you think that might be different for women or for non-binary folks? I know some of y'all are trans-masc, so definitely take the pieces of that fit and do with them what you will. And I'll throw this one in the air and let y'all decide.
Yeah, I can hop on that question. I can't speak for anyone else but myself. I can speak to my own experience with how I've encountered, just our the shapings of the culture I grew up in. That I think a lot of us share a lot of that. Patriarchy, heterosexism, all the things, all of the things. So power and how power falls into that. And for me, growing up, socialized as male, like pretty early on, I felt a lot of pressure to perform masculinity, to feel worthy as a person. And pretty early on, performance of masculinity included sexuality and like dominance and virility and prowess and like competence and all of those things. So the heterosexism and homophobia are part of that, as being not masculine, and having and I think there's where I grew up and in my family, the cultures of my family accentuated that. There's a lot of machismo in like my family and my dad's side of the family, pretty conservative Filipino immigrants, and a bit with like my mom and my stepdad. My stepdad, who's in my life for a long time, since almost my whole life, was like multi-generational white Midwestern military family. So a lot of pressures to be a particular kind of man. So with that being said, like me being situated in that way in the culture of like kind of masculinity and heterosexism, it meant a lot. It meant a lot if I was to, feminine, if I was not heterosexual. It felt really dangerous, and also like intersecting with kind of just the like other kind of personal self-esteem stuff, not that it's not connected to it, but like personal self-esteem stuff and like lack of a feeling of real belonging and security within my families, like made me a lot more, I felt a lot more vulnerable to like these kind of ways that I could belong or not belong. So it felt a lot more high stakes. And so, like I said, like I couldn't, it was difficult for me to even see past the fear of that to like really discern for myself what felt true. Yeah, so it's like, it's hard to, I can't say a lot like in my, what I saw and in my judgment, for women and people who identified as women, particularly like cis women, there's more, forgiveness and even, like what's the word? Like bisexual women or gay, it's like like a fetish thing, and it's like exotified and objectified. So there's space for it. There's space for it in like male dominant culture, and I think women probably have a lot less hangups. Not that women don't also uphold, conservative values and the patriarchy and heterosexism and all of that. And yeah, so at least for those two, that's kind of the judgments that I can share. I think kind of, I imagine that for most trans folks, like, I mean, that's kind of, I don't know, that's a whole nother, they're already outside, in a kind of marginalized location. And so I really can't speak for, in any comparative way. Yeah, that's what I got.
I mean, I think also for trans communities, there is sometimes a tendency to push towards binary expectations. So I certainly experienced a lot of like trans masculine groups. There was pressure to be as manly as possible, and kind of how people would speak and act about women and relationships was a part of that. And actually kind of divesting of that toxic masculinity was part of kind of moving slightly away from the masculine end of the spectrum for me. Having said that, in terms of sexualization, I think I feel, having lived as both a bi woman and a bi man, I think both are sexualized, but in different ways. So I think bi women are definitely sexualized and experience a lot of assumptions and mistreatment because of that. But I found as a bi man that I've been sexualized kind of as a villain almost. So when I met my wife, people around were kind of really like, oh, don't marry him, he's bi. And this sense that as a bi man, I'd be very hypersexual and want to have sex with a lot of people, and definitely want to have sex more with men than women. And so you kind of add kind of asexual invisibility to the bi invisibility, particularly in religious communities, which I have been a part of. And I think, yeah, there's this weird way that people see you when you're bi, that you must want to have a lot of sex, which becomes a problem.
I also have experiences being both a bi woman and a bi man. When I first came out as bisexual, I was very much so identifying as cisgender. So a lot of people took that as like me coming out as bi was basically just like spicy straight, like I was basically still attracted to men and only men, but like occasionally a few girls, which at the time was not true. It was very just equal for me, equal attraction, no preference. And when I started coming out as transmasculine, those ways that I was being perceived altered and kind of shifted. And now that I'm going to be starting the school year trans stealth. So hoping that people will perceive me as a cis guy. And I've already, from being in the small town that I live in the Pacific Northwest, have already been getting perceived as, because I am bisexual, I am feminine and flamboyant, and just because of also being attracted to men, and that like I must have a preference and I must be mostly gay, or like mostly into men, which it's still fairly equal for me. So I do love being feminine, I do love being flamboyant, but it's only on like the rare occasion. So there's a lot of assumptions around being bisexual, and they all tend to cater towards men, which cater towards straight men, not bisexual men. And it's it's affected me when I presented as cis and how I present now.
I might just add on. Yeah, I agree with a lot of what's been said on the bi-erasure question. Like, I remember when one of my colleagues at work, she found out that I was bisexual and said, "Well, your marriage is going to end. Every bisexual man, winds up leaving their wife for a man." I'm like, okay, well, thanks for your observation. And I find that I have experienced that the homosexual male community sometimes treats bisexual men with suspicion, especially since I'm married to a woman. Like, I've hung out with gay friends, male friends and their friends, been to a couple of clubs. It's like I'm not really part of the group, and all of my friends who are bisexual are women. So there is that bit of isolation feeling, and it goes back to, I think, Frederick, someone said that about how bisexual men are less likely to be out. And on the matter of sexualization, like, yeah, I've had more than one cisgender female acquaintance or someone at a bar like, come sleep with me and my boyfriend, not that I'm not ever open to such things, but it's not for everyone. People shouldn't be making those kinds of assumptions that, yeah, it's just all about sex.
Yeah, Mark, it sounds like you got the bisexual bingo card, just all those right there. Yeah, and Jax, I think you're exactly right. Like, the assumptions about bi folks, I think that the majority of straight society still thinks of bisexual as men and women. And so, us non-binary folks are nowhere to be seen. But because of that, it's, you're just actually gay if you're a man who's bisexual, and you're just actually straight if you're a woman who's bisexual, because obviously everybody wants a male partner. Funny how that works. So Mark, you brought up a really interesting point about space in the community, and I would love to riff off that. Can you tell us a little bit more about times that you have felt welcomed in the community, if any? And what were the circumstances? How did the community make you feel welcome? What was going on that kind of made that space comfortable for you?
I suppose the going back how many years, maybe 10 or 15, when I moved to a much more progressive area from a religious rural community, where I'm now much more comfortable. The first friends I made from the LGBTQ plus community were homosexual men, and they kind of took me under their wing a little bit and invited me to get-togethers. I mentioned going to clubs and that kind of thing, and I went along with them. So there was I didn't mean to say that there is total judgment or exclusion, not at all. At least that's not been my experience. But there is a sense of being viewed somewhat differently. That said, I think, split between my experiences and then what I read about, which is often horror stories. But I feel like in between the two extremes is probably what I would have experienced. And I think there's been a marked improvement in the acceptance over the past 10, 15 years, I've found.
Alex, you've been out for a while. Have you found that similar, that to be true for you as well in your community?
Yeah, I think there is an improvement in acceptance, but with that, there's always backlashes. And I think I find in the LGBTQ plus spaces that I'm in, being bi is definitely much more accepted, except when you show up with your partner of the opposite gender. And then it's kind of suddenly awkward or difficult. And also, I don't know, but I think this is the same in the US as the UK, that there's a lot of political and religious backlash at the moment. And I'm a minister, so I spend a lot of my time in political and religious spaces. And often even kind of saying I'm bi doesn't feel safe in those spaces. So I think culturally, it seems like there's a lot more acceptance, and there is in the right places, but actually politically, legally, in faith spaces and all of those sorts of spaces, it almost feels like it's going backwards at times, but I don't see that as kind of something to be really worried about, because I also think these things cycle, and there's always going to be a kickback against acceptance.
Yeah, that's definitely a helpful thing keep in perspective. Willie, how about you? What spaces have you felt comfortable in within the community? What was going on that made those spaces comfortable for you?
Yeah, good question. I really feel like, I don't know, it seems like over the course of my lifetime so far, at least from when I was in high school, there's been a lot of expansion from what I gather in terms of options for how people can identify, and have community. And just really appreciating, what I've been hearing about, right? Like the younger generations now, and particularly, one of the things I just, I think the internet and technology, like one of the many gifts, is just how accessible things are. Information travels so fast, and community can happen so fast, and like healing, like just so much more possibility can happen because of what's accessible. So yeah, like I guess it's, I feel like there are still I haven't really been, I was never really like centrally like networked within the gay or queer community that's like out in the bars and stuff out here in the Bay Area. So like my communities have always been more just like, friends and stuff. And even then there's people with more old school views, but I've definitely found not in the public scene to be where I make community and feel accepted. And that said, I think there is growing acceptance, but I think there's a lot else that travels with what happens out in the bars and club scene, that I try to avoid. I don't know. I think that touches on some of the question.
Yeah, absolutely. And we can't overstate the importance of chosen family. And like y'all have mentioned, like the bar scene, the club scene is, it's one of the only spaces that our community has. So Jax, especially being way underage, I would love your take on, community building and what that looks like. And, where you are in the Pacific Northwest, are there non-alcohol based community spaces that you can hang out? Like, do you have queer bookstores or, any of those kinds of spaces?
So first finding out I was bisexual, it didn't have a huge weight on my life. I was 12 and not interested in dating. So I was, I wasn't really in spaces when I was bisexual and cisgender. But I really started finding spaces when I was questioning my gender identity. And I've spent most of my life in San Diego. I only recently moved to the Pacific Northwest like 3 months ago. So my experiences in San Diego have been huge for me. And they do mainly, revolve around my trans experiences. And through that, I find that the trans community is more open towards bi and just M-spec identities in general, than, cis queer spaces, at least that I've found. And especially being more in youth spaces that are, they tend to be online. It's really open regarding sexuality, and it's something that I've come to really appreciate, because I cannot say the same with gender for a lot of spaces. But yeah, I first got involved with San Diego Pride. My first event was their Youth Leadership Academy in 2019, and that was monumental for me. I had been questioning my gender for months at a time at that point, and that event, like it was, I can easily say that was my first time being around other trans people, and just spending the day with other trans people really helped me to realize who I was. And I just, like, within hours of being there, was asking for my name tag to be changed with my name and pronouns. And so that event really tied me to stay at San Diego Pride. So I have been volunteering ever since then. I was officially marked as one of their volunteers in July of last year, I believe, and their programs went online in March. So I've been actually I'm late to a meeting right now that I let them know like we're all good, but I'll be right after this going to a meeting with San Diego Pride. We're having a writing workshop today. So it's, yeah, youth spaces have been very online since the pandemic, and that accessibility has made not only finding community, but like being able to spread the word and, you know, be an activist myself. It's made that really, really easy.
That's so awesome to hear. My first Pride was in San Diego. Back, I went to San Diego State. My first Pride was probably 2005 or 2006. So it's funny how small the world is.
Can I add something?
Absolutely.
Yeah, I just thought of, other places that it's interesting. I was like thinking about, oh, actually, I do feel a lot more comfortable in a couple other communities. Like one, like the kink community, and also in spiritual communities, like both of which feel like is spiritual, and particularly like those that are more active in like social justice, like these communities that are already like that attract more people that are marginally identified, or like located, and like have to do a lot more discerning of what's true. That's they're more committed to what's true rather than like aligning with some given option, like acceptable option. And so I definitely find that in the kink community, because there is so much exploration, a lot more in like sex positivity and a lot more openness. It's a lot more common and accepted, like, oh, that's just who you are and what you're doing, and that's fine. And then also in like the spiritual communities that I've been in, like because of I think like people like me, like us, and like who fall outside of what's kind of socially deemed okay, have to find some way to cope. Have to find some way to cope. And like so in Buddhist spaces in particular, I think like Buddhism kind of seems to catch a lot of folks who aren't caught and held by other, a number of other spiritual traditions. Not that no other spiritual traditions catch people. But that I've found a lot of people there that can understand and have a commitment to making more space, and finding and looking at where we are just hurting ourselves and others in our society.
That's a great point, Willie. I think like you mentioned earlier, like settler colonialism, I think it's important for us to note that, like so many of the systems of oppression that are harmful to the LGBTQ community, like heterosexism, cissexism, those things are very closely linked to anti-Blackness, to xenophobia, to anti-Semitism, to Islamophobia, and they're all undergirded by white supremacy. And so even things like fat phobia and sizeism, there's a ton of people who've done amazing writing and research on these subjects that I will encourage you to Google if you're interested in seeing how all these things are connected. But I think that the thread that I'm seeing, Willie, is that those spaces that are working to fight against the systems of oppression are the spaces where we can be more comfortable, even if it's not necessarily about our sexuality. Like I definitely feel like I've had people in anti-racist spaces be more respectful of my pronouns than necessarily like cis queer people,
Totally. And like I just, it was so fascinating for me. Like I went to a couple Pride events this year, like one in San Francisco. I was like downtown, and just a lot of many different kinds of people, but mostly like chiseled, white, muscular, gay men. And it was a very particular kind of energy, and like how that kind of energy meets me and how I show up in social spaces. And then I went to an event put on by Black Pride in Oakland, and it was like 80%, either like women or non-male identifying people, like lots of different kinds of bodies. And it was just a totally, for many reasons, I'm sure, totally different energy, like totally different energy, a lot more smiles. I felt a lot more at ease to express myself more freely. I realized I was like, whoa, I can totally like lean into more, femininity and like other things. And like it just felt like less of a vibe, I felt personally just kind of less of the draw into where am I in the power structure, how do I, assure my safety, or how much affirmations do I have to use, to feel okay and healthy. So, I don't know, one data point, but I found that interesting and also not surprising.
Yeah, definitely. So our next prepared question, we got a little on a couple tangents, which I love. So Alex, I'm going to jump to you. How did your recognition and acceptance of your sexual orientation change how you moved through the world?
I think gradually it just changed everything. And I think a lot of that was to do with how I understood my body as well as a trans person. I think as trans people, there can be a lot of assumptions about how we experience and live in our bodies. And for me, getting used to and understanding my sexuality was a really big part of reclaiming my body and being okay with that. And that affects for me spiritual life, relationships, including kind of non-romantic relationships, how well I can do my work. Also the fact I'm neurodiverse, and it was a lot easier for me to accept my neurodiversity once I accepted my sexuality. So yeah, it just kind of, I think it's one of those elements of life that intersects with everything for some people.
I love that. Mark, same question to you. How did your recognition and acceptance of your sexual orientation change how you moved through the world?
I think just because of where life has taken me, not a huge amount. Like I always had planned to kind of get out of my conservative community and move to a bigger city that was had more acceptance in many ways, not just in sexuality, but it feels liberating in a way to be not have to hide it. I mean, like if I had brought up these feelings publicly in high school, I risked facing violence from cisgender men in my community, but now like to be openly attracted to more than one gender, celebrate it through pride and other means, which are such joyous occasions. I found it feels really good, and like you're able to be yourself. So it's definitely a point of happiness.
That's awesome. Jack, same question to you.
First, knowing I was bi, it didn't really have much of an effect on me, especially because I, at that age wasn't really having frequent crushes, and wasn't pursuing crushes. I was having just focusing on school and stuff. And I it really helped me later on, though, to build community and to navigate my gender, because I feel if I were not already at least somewhat warmly familiar with the community, I would have had a much harder time finding out that I was not cisgender. It even got to the point where like I had my first short haircut before saying that I was trans, because I was experiencing like intense like gender dysphoria around needing my haircut, but I was not connecting the dots that was a gender thing and not just like, oh, I need to look like Halsey, so it was very it helped me gain traction in researching and just gaining knowledge on the rest of the community as a whole.
Oh, they're such wonderful answers. Willie, same question to you.
Yeah, I mean, I think the acceptance piece was like what feels like so important for me around that, not just the recognition, because the journey between recognition and acceptance, like there's been a lot happening, with acceptance. Like I've had to really come into to look at, okay, like what makes, how can I feel safe to accept and to accept this, you know, like where, like what community do I need, like what do I need to know about myself, my place in the universe, my, you know, my place in the world, in order to do that. And like there is definitely, you know, that's still, although I've come to a lot of acceptance, like I'm definitely still in process. You know, there's definitely still, you know, heterosexism in there and all the other pieces of, you know, all the other pieces of that. And yeah, to once I've felt safe enough to accept and like come to know what that is, I could really start to appreciate the beauty of it. You know, the beauty of like my tenderness and, you know, who I am when I express, you know, intimately with others, and how wonderful that is, and how much more space I have, you know, that I think this culture, these overlapping cultures and systems of oppression and dominance don't allow anyone, you know, don't allow anyone. Like so much of our humanity is crushed down, you know. So it's allowed me to walk very differently, and it's also given me a greater sense of purpose and recognition, like to come to understand my pain. I've also had to come to understand the sources, and that's, you know, like really activated me to want to make a difference and help others to have more of that space as well, and to illuminate that. So I feel really grateful for, you know, being born into a body that's, you know, that's brown, that's, you know, signed male at birth, that was, you know, like socialized male, that bleeds outside of the lines of masculinity, you know, including being brown and all the other things. Because I feel like I've had to create this space for myself to really feel all of myself. And I don't know that I would have been as driven to do that, you know, out of necessity if I was fell more neatly into the box.
Yeah, 100%. We do have a question from the audience, so I'm going to throw that out. Early in the conversation, Alex used the term partially asexual. Please explain that a bit more. Also, Frederick mentioned coming out again and again. Please explain what that process looks like. I'm going to share a link to HRC webinar by Robin Oakes, one of the premier bi scholars of our generation, about supporting bi youth. And one of the things that she covers in the presentation, the whole thing is wonderful. One of the things she covers is the bi invisibility, because people, a whole lot of things wrong with assumptions about people's gender or sexuality just by looking at them anyways. But one of the things that she covers is the fact that people assume other people's sexual orientation based on the gender that they assume their partner is. So it's a whole lot of assumptions piled on top of each other that keep us needing to come out again and again. So I'm going to share the link for that in the chat. And Alex, I will let you tackle the partially asexual piece of it. And feel free to use any of the like ace umbrella terms with us as well, and we can find definitions for those for the audience if that's easier.
Yeah, so sometimes I use the terms gray ace and also sapiosexual, and I can explain those a little bit. So gray ace refers to kind of, well, basically sometimes feeling asexual, that, you know, I don't feel that I experience sexual attraction in a normative way. And sapiosexual kind of refers to being more attracted to someone's mind effectively than their body. It's also one of the reasons that I use words like queer and pansexual, because what a person's makeup of their body looks like doesn't really make me feel attracted or not to them. You know, I don't have crushes on people based on what they look like. I can't experience attraction to people until I speak to them and get to know them. And I also have periods of my life where I just don't experience sexual attraction, and where romantic attraction or even friendships are more important than the idea of being in a sexual relationship. For me personally, that's partly linked to transness and to my feelings about my body. But I also think as for me, with my neurodiversity and autism, I would far rather have a really long and complex conversation about my special interests than go out and have sex. And that doesn't mean that I judge sexuality, and sometimes I'm hypersexual, but it's just not the core of what relating to other people is about for me personally.
Thanks for answering that, Alex. Jax, you wanted to jump in?
Yes, I wanted to cover like the coming out again and again part. For a lot of people in the community, not everyone, but for a lot of people, there isn't just the one identity that they may resonate with. And usually, or at least frequently, not usually, a lot of people will come out as one thing, and then, later in like processing that identity, they, think another term fits them better. And, there's multiple layers to coming out and finding out who you are, with both sexuality and gender. For in my experiences, I first came out as bi, and then I came out as pan, and then poly, and then queer and questioning, and then back to bi, and then now omnisexual and back to bi. And like it's very like flexible for some people. And even with gender for me, in like experimenting with, like, I at first was super, like, very much so holding on to my femininity. I would not identify as transmasculine, as binary. I was very like androgynous, non-binary for a while. And once I let myself be more comfortable with the idea of being masculine, I am almost binary, not quite binary trans, but I'm fairly close to that. I just use the word gender nonconforming for myself, and there's a lot of layers to that onion when it comes to coming out. So
Absolutely. All right, so let's see. What is your favorite thing about being bisexual? Mark, let's go with you.
Okay. So it's tough. Like for many, including me, it opens you up to new sexual experiences that you wouldn't otherwise have. Of course, the sexual attraction is a big part of it for me. You don't feel so constricted. It's tough to answer this question, though, I find, without coming across as pompous. Like I'm I'm happy with who I am. I am coming from a position of extreme privilege. I mean, I'm a cisgender white man. There is privilege in being bisexual, I recognize. Like, it pains me to say it, but being married to a woman, being someone who is more masculine in tendencies, I don't have to worry as much about, being out and about where I travel in the world. For example, I was married in Jamaica, which is one of the many areas of the world that still struggle with major homophobia, and biphobia as well, but they didn't know. So I suppose being bisexual rather than homosexual, there's also less pressure on me to come out. Like we talked about this earlier, it's easier to be selective, to come out to who I want, when I want. In reality, maybe my family doesn't all need to ever know. These are perhaps unfortunate realities, but they are privilege that comes with the bisexual label, I suppose, from where I stand.
Thank you, Mark. Alex, what's your favorite thing about being bisexual?
I think just constant change and revelation. And I was thinking about that actually as Jax was talking as well, about coming out over and over again, that sometimes in the trans community there's talks about, oh, but what if you regret it, or what if you change your mind? And actually I think one of the great things about being queer is just this sense of, that's fine, like I can change my mind. I can be this one day and that the next day. I can love all sorts of people in all sorts of ways, and that's exciting to me.
I love that. Jax, how about you?
I almost like perceive the world a completely different way. I tend to look at more people and have like aesthetic attraction for them, and that helps me to just see humanity as a whole in just a remarkably stunning light. Like just being able to look at people and not only regarding like physical attraction, but also regarding just like, you know, as Alex was saying about like just being attracted to people's minds. Like you know, like with, for instance, with my best friend, and we're completely platonic, but like my best friend sometimes just drops me messages about like, man, I really love people. And, you know, much more in depth than that, I could never go to the extent of how poetic they can be about it. But it's, you know, like I tend, and we both identify as bisexual. And, you know, I just tend to look at humanity in a much more beautiful way. And it's opened my eyes and my mind.
That's so wonderful. Willie, what's your favorite thing about being bi?
Yeah, the colors and the puns. No, I mean, I think this kind of comes back to the yes, that one right there. The piece around acceptance, like, I have my version of it. I have my version, and I love it. And I can talk about like, oh, I chocolate, what I love most about chocolate is the best flavor or something like that. So I love the things that I love and that I'm drawn to and that I'm open to. But really, just accepting where I am means that I have the freedom and expansion of that, of possibility. I love what Alex was saying about, just kind of continual discovery, and maybe Jax was saying too. I can't remember, it's all bleeding together. But yeah, like those pieces of it. And also, like there's that like bitter hurt part of me that's just like sticking it to the man. I'm like, no. I'm good. I'm gonna just keep doing me and doing it with other people and just like making a bigger and bigger party out of it. And it feels really good to shrug off the weight of all of that and to shrug off the pressures and, the violence. That feels great to be a part of that.
I love all those answers. I asked this question because I joke that my favorite thing about being bi is the stereotype that bis can't sit right. I'm sure y'all have seen the meme, like bisexual people can't just sit in a chair. Our legs are always folded some way. It's my favorite stereotype about the community. My real favorite thing about being bisexual, though, is that it kind of broke open the idea of binaries for me, which is funny because, bi is in the name. But once I, shrugged off the biphobia that said that bisexuality is transphobic, I was able, one of the things that I do for myself, I used to do it a lot more, I don't do it as much now, but one of the things that I would do for myself to fight that bi-erasure is that anytime I would meet someone new, I would tell myself like they could be bi. And it really helped cement for me that idea that like assume nothing. I know nothing about you until I talk to you, until we have a conversation, and until we get to the point where we're safe and comfortable enough to be vulnerable and to be real with each other. And so it also, like Jack said, like reaffirms my commitment to be human with other people. Switching gears the other direction, what's the hardest thing about being bisexual? I will let y'all self-select.
Oh, I can start with it. I talked a bit about the suspicion that I've encountered, but more broadly, I'd say the judgment, like overt and otherwise. Like, there's no way you can be monogamous. You're confused. You got shit to sort out, or oh no, your poor wife. Like, how can she trust you? Not that people have the courage typically to say this to my face, but you hear it through the grapevine. So I think that's been the biggest extreme annoyance of it.
In a lighthearted way, my response would be not knowing if the feelings I have are romantic or platonic. But more in a more serious light, definitely the misconceptions, the assumptions about the community as a whole, they're all just invalidating.
Yeah, I think just assumptions and invisibility, really.
Yeah, for me, I gotta expand what this question gets at for me, because it's like the frustrations that I have, like it just feels like a symptom of like deeper systemic cultural issues. I really just love so nourished over the last year by the work of Kim Tallbear, who's an Indigenous scholar. She has a blog called The Critical Polyamorist, and she's just done some amazing work and like really looking at how in particular, like compulsory monogamy is a feature of settler colonialism. That like a man was given however many acres, more for a wife, more for each child. So the stripping away of indigenous people from the land and then parceling it out for the project of colonization, was systematized like along with compulsory heterosexual monogamy, and increasingly homosexuality, as far as it doesn't disturb the power dynamics of who's in power. But she talks a lot about how non-colonial or different indigenous cultures, like they don't objectify sexuality and spirituality in the way that our culture does. And so they don't kind of parcel it out, and a lot of those cultures don't even think of gender the way that we do, but like they kind of, they can say, oh, I guess we have this many gender, we had to think about it and put it into your categories. So like I really love, and I'm trying to embrace more of this idea of like, what does it mean to not have like men on the left and women on the right, and then go make a nuclear family and good luck. With like this really brittle family structure that if the family breaks, like the kids are fucked. Like if you have like a web of kinship where everyone's committed to just being in good relation, whatever that means. And it'll mean like just, between these two people and between these two people and between this person and the land and between this person and, the plants and animals around. And maybe that involves something that we might call sex. Like maybe there's care, and that takes, that involves genitals. Maybe there's spiritual healing that involves genitals, but it really is just being in good relation with this being and that being and that being. So the frustrations that I have with, trying, to have a, non easily identifiable heterosexual or homosexual, like sexual identity in this world feel a bigger part of, what's at odds with what I was just describing, which I think, is kind of feels more spacious. The spaciousness I like isn't readily there, and I'm not very legible.
Thank you for sharing that. I did drop the link in the chat for the Critical Polyamorist, so definitely go check that out, folks. All right, we're on to our last couple of questions here. So what advice do you have for folks tuning in who are questioning their own sexuality?
I'll start. Yes. Always just keep on questioning and getting to know, like do that shit. And find people that are supportive, and that you are ultimately like the one who knows the most. People might have some insights of what they've seen that can point you to a deeper truth, but like ultimately you will know that truth more than anyone, and that may change. So I definitely encourage people to stay in the questioning.
It really takes time, especially if you are looking for a like very specific label for yourself. It can take a lot of time. So just let yourself take that time to figure it out. Don't put pressure on yourself to find a label right away. Labels should only be helpful if it feels helpful to you. They should only be used if it is a positive thing for you to use. So for a while, I just used the word queer because I was just letting myself be attracted to whoever I was attracted to. I was, questioning. I didn't have a more specific label for myself, but I would just while I was questioning was just letting myself be attracted to whoever I found to be attractive, and not having a label can eliminate a lot of anxiety when you're questioning.
For me, I'd say, yeah, don't be afraid or ashamed of your sexuality. I suppressed these feelings at the beginning because I was concerned about losing friends. That was about 20 years ago. Now things are much more open, at least where I am. But I know not everyone might be in that situation. So like being with LGBTQ plus positive people, attending events like this, I hope it can help you discover who you are. I know acceptance can vary. Bigger cities, in my experience, tend to be more overall progressive, tend to be hubs of these communities, like Toronto and Montreal near me, for example. I say this from a position of privilege, though. Again, there are many who could face being disowned by their families, could face violence, could see their careers destroyed. I am very lucky to be in the position that I am in. It's easy to make these observations, but I know they can't work for everyone.
Yeah, I think find spaces if you can where you can explore and play and be on a journey, and don't try not to over obsess about the destination. I think it's not, it's actually about the journey. It's not about necessarily finding the label, although words can be really helpful when we do find them. And don't let others define you, because that's probably my biggest regret from kind of my teenage years, is letting people assume things about my sexuality and that actually govern who I was. It's better to just be who you are, even if that's undefinable.
I love that. Yeah. And I think y'all have said some really wonderful things about labels and identity and how to use those things in a constructive and helpful and healing way. And the only thing that I want to add to that is that you are the only one who gets to decide on your labels, and it doesn't matter what your history is. You don't have to prove to anyone that you're bi enough to use any of the labels that we've thrown out here or any other label. You're the only one who knows how you feel. So you're the only one who gets to decide what that looks like. You can never have sex with anyone and know that you're bisexual. So I'm just gonna throw that out there. Our second to last question, I do have one more not on the script after this. Our second to last question is, what advice do you have for parents of bisexual kiddos? I don't know if any of y'all are parents. I didn't think so, but you are all children at some point. So what advice do you have for parents of bisexual kiddos?
So I occasionally foster a bisexual kid, and some of their family, I think, want to be so accepting of queerness that, like, when she has a same gender partner, it's all yay, it's really exciting. And then when she has an opposite gender partner, it's like, oh, okay. So I think I would say, like, try and normalize everything. It doesn't matter what type of partner your young person has, or what they identify as today. It's kind of, if you can accept it and just be like, yeah, okay, that's cool. Don't go to either extreme of kind of being super excited about one gender or another, or super scared, because actually we're people.
I do have one piece of very specific advice and then like two pieces of more general. Very specifically, please do not assume that every single one of your kids' friends is an intimate partner. It makes just being a kid really difficult, and just having friends really difficult, because as a kid, like most of the people, like the very strong majority of the people that I'm close with are strictly platonic. So it's limiting when there are assumptions there. And then also just broader advice, just go with your gut, just love your kid, listen to them, don't, as Alex said, please don't be overbearing, and just help them find community. If they need to commute somewhere, help give them that drive, or whatever, like whatever you can do to help find community. And just learn, teach yourself, do research, learn about bisexuality, and try your best to learn about and get over the common misconceptions as well.
For me, yeah, unless you count cats, I am too am not a parent. But thinking about what I would have liked to have experienced had I been in that situation, be as open as possible about it in order to understand how best you can support your child. Like, it's extremely reassuring to know that your parents have your back, that they won't be judging you, that they are ready to listen. Like, listening is so critical. And be aware of as much as possible of their situation. I'm in a pretty progressive area. We have school board trustees who are from the LGBTQ plus community. It flows down, but in many places, probably most places around the world, it's not like that. Emotional and physical violence may result from a child or teenager coming out. So support them in their journey, being as out as they wish to be, as out as they whatever makes them comfortable. And I think having parents involved in LGBTQ plus causes, I think, would be a really important way to demonstrate your support through actions, not just words. Walking the talk sends a strong message.
Yeah, it's awesome hearing what everyone's shared. I agree with it all. And to kind of add to what Mark is saying, I think, for me, just like inviting parents to, there's a lot of work. There's a lot of work that may be involved with being able to show up well, for your child, and being able to give your child what I would hope to as a parent. Like, definitely getting to know the issues that folks of the LGBT, QA plus community face. Getting to know all those statistics and the history and the politics is really useful. I'd also invite parents to, become really curious about, their edges of discomfort and their fears, and get support in looking at those things. Whether that's, around, a discomfort with who their child is becoming in the world, or, and also I think, what I wanted to add to what Mark was saying, around, I think what everyone was saying around, like, being supportive with your kid. Like, I would also invite parents to maybe pay attention to if you are trying to prove that you are a good parent of a queer child, of a bisexual child, and need that validation from either the child or from other people, because that could you could end up objectifying your kid in that way, and can be at odds with them just having the kind of support that they might actually need and benefit from. And what I would say too is, like, for me, looking at all of these things for myself, and as I looked at other issues that, like, that people that do, have, gender or sexuality expressions that I don't, people in the trans community, I started to discover ways, that my life can be more free now. So, could be a potential opportunity to discover not just more for your child, but more for yourself.
Absolutely. And everybody could use a good therapist. So I am going to ask one last question. If any of the folks in the audience have questions, you're definitely encouraged to share those in the chat or in the QA. And we have a couple minutes, hopefully, to get to those. But my last prepared question for y'all is, how are you taking care of yourself? It's been a shitty fucking year. What are you doing to, keep the fire in your heart alive? How are you taking care of yourself and balancing all your responsibilities with actually being a human? Jax, I'll start with you.
All right, this is going to be I'm winging this. I try to balance my, like, work schedule, work in very loose quotation marks, and social life. I, am very, very active in activist spaces, and, sometimes that can be, filling for my energy, and sometimes that can easily drain me. So I try to, a lot of the friends that I gain are also from those activist spaces. So it's, you know, it helps because there's a sense of community there, but sometimes just volunteering in general can be really draining. So I make sure to, especially since I feel like I have all the time in the world right now because I'm on summer break and it is the last month of summer break. And it's just that month that's just like, when is school starting? But it's, you know, like I'm trying to prioritize not only what I think needs to get done in a day, but also what I want to do that is not like spending my whole day on TikTok or whatever, you know, doing good things that are fairly progressive, but progressive. I don't know if that's the right word, but yeah, yeah, things that are productive is the word I was going for. While also, you know, not draining my battery every second I get. So just monitoring that balance has been really helping me, and drawing and playing guitar and, you know, indulging my hobbies and stuff.
Awesome. Sounds like you got it way more figured out than I did at your age. Mark, how about you? How are you balancing life during the pandemic?
So my wife is American. When the pandemic hit, we were stuck on opposite sides of the border, and I've pretty much never lived alone in my life. And suddenly I was, like, because I couldn't see friends either at the beginning. So it was lonely, but I was fortunate that my workplace was very flexible. I wound up working for much of the pandemic from the U.S. So it turned out I got engaged and married during the pandemic. My wife immigrated from the U.S. to Canada. I'm a full-time student. I work full-time. I have volunteer gigs. So I keep myself extremely busy. Jack's talked about not burning yourself out. So I might not be the best example. On the one hand, I've never been bored during the pandemic, but on the other hand, you have to find time to take care of yourself. And sometimes piling extreme workload on yourself can be a way to cover up underlying issues. And I did that in my previous marriage, so I know. But yeah, please always take care of yourself and find those spaces that are there for support.
Absolutely, yeah. You got to make time for sleep too. Stay hydrated.
I should mention that.
Yeah. Willie, how about you?
Yeah, I'm, you know, like right when the pandemic hit, like it was so nice. I was so ready for it. I was like so ready to go. I mean, not for obviously all the like devastation and politics that happened, but like I was like already just kind of deepening into like a inner like healing journey and stuff with, you know, therapy and 12-step and stuff like that. So it was like, you know, let go of my fitness jobs, just like went internal. I was like working remote for my therapy stuff. So I feel really fortunate to have and then connected online with the community, with the spiritual community around Buddhism and activism that I, you know, sit with pretty much every day. So like being connected with people and, you know, continuing to center just more and more deeply, like what I need to feel okay in myself, in my own body, and on this plane of like and spiritually, you know, in this plane of existence, and sometimes that really means pulling back from, you know, the social, both like in my communities as well as like the kind of political stuff, you know, and listening to that. Like more recently, just been trying to get out to nature more. Like it's just so restorative for me to be in expansive space and to have more time. So I'm trying to be better at like scheduling in time for that, because I can very easily fall into yeah, all the work and all the groups and all the circles and all the Zoom. So I try to do that, and you know, just like build in time to stare at a wall, you know, to actually do frivolous things, and you know, to remember that when I'm feeling urgency and behind, you know, like that's not my full like place, my you know, inherent dignity in the world. That's a lot of you know, white supremacy culture and capitalism stuff. So just to like finding communities that help me remember and reflect that back, so that I can give myself like a little, you know, get used to, the deep end is the right word, but like having more space for myself, you know. Yeah.
That's fantastic. I love it. Alex, how about you?
Spending a lot of time outside, a lot of time doing creative stuff. I think also just being a little bit more honest and less afraid than I was before COVID, both in terms of with my workplace, being able to say, no, that practice is oppressive or not helpful, asking for accommodations and things like that, which I know is a privilege, but it's also been something I've had to learn. So kind of trying to do that more, trying to accept help more, but definitely time outside, and time in kind of multiple spiritual communities and outlets is really important to me. So I work for the church, but actually spending time with people of different faiths has been vital for my survival, really.
Fantastic. Thank you all so much. And I do want to open it up to the audience for questions. I'll give y'all a minute to get over your shyness. But while you're thinking about your questions for our amazing panelists, we do have many other Q+ EDU sessions coming up, including, let's see, Thursday, we are doing a regional GSA coalition panel featuring the coalition leaders across Texas. And then on Friday, I'll be leading a session on finding inclusive professional development for teachers. And let's see, what is next week? Next Monday, no. What day is the 16th? Yeah, Monday. Yeah, that's Monday. Monday, the 16th is our lunch and learn session this year. So it'll be from noon to 12:45 Central Time. And it is dealing with cheating and boundary violations in monogamous and non-monogamous relationships. And that is featuring Sarah Bachman-Williams of Southwest Love Fest. And then Wednesday, the 18th, one of the staff therapists at Out Youth will be leading a session on interview questions for your child's potential therapist. And then Saturday, we have a special Saturday session next week as well. We are going to be joined by folks in Cameroon, Egypt, South Africa, Tunisia, and Zimbabwe for a session on learning from African LGBTQIA+ leaders. So we definitely hope you will join us for that. We also have sessions all the way through the 27th. So definitely check out our schedule and you can find the other stuff there. So since we don't have any other questions from the audience, I'm going to go ahead and close this out. But thank you all so much for joining us. This has been fantastic, phenomenal. I really appreciate your time and energy and vulnerability. And yeah, thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.